Today I am testing out and reviewing paints that I've had for 2 years and I haven't even opened them yet. That's how busy I am. So, Dr. Peach Martins, and this is Hydrus set 2. So, don't have the first set, diving into set 2. Today, after years, I don't like buying brand new products. This is not sponsored. I bought this with my own money to use. And I'm a huge fan of working with watercolors, but I also love painting with fountain pen inks, which aren't really meant for painting. They're meant for fountain pens. So I thought I would get some proper watercolor liquid and test them out. These have been literally untouched on my table. I'm gonna give them a little shaky wakey. I hope that's actually okay. I don't even actually really know. Maybe that's like a no-no, but you can see that there's like sediments at the bottom. These need to be reawakened. So here are the colors I'm staring at. Here we have a burnt umber, deep yellow, which looks rather orange. We have a yellow ochre, giving it a shaky poo. Permanent red, which looks like a very orangey red. This is a cobalt blue. And while I'm doing all these, just to let you know, I'm actually gonna be doing a painting of the Loch Ness Monster for an upcoming Outlander-inspired course that's releasing January 1st, Indian red. So I'm actually got these out because I wanna look at distressing my paper. This is Viridian green, yummy, yummy. What is this? Burnt sienna. This is perfect. So these are the sheets I'm using as inspiration, these kind of creature sheets, I guess I call them. And I'm gonna be making one for the Loch Ness Monster for my Outlander course. And I thought these sap green, yes, 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 might be just the perfect thing. Payne's gray, these kind of earth tones for doing something in a watery loch. Yes, sepia. These are great earth tones. And I just wanted to see how they compared against my normal Daniel Smiths. And this is alizarin crimson. So I'm really excited to dive in and test out these colors. All right, so these feel like a little bit of a miracle project. I'm not gonna lie, because according to their packaging, they are light fast, archival, made of fine art pigments, acid-free and non-toxic. So if these are some things I like, this is what I should actually be painting with and not my beloved fountain pen inks, which are never light fast. But I just love fountain pens and I love painting with the inks because they're so rich. I also have this really bad obsession with collecting, well, it's more like hoarding at this problem. I collect like vintage and antique perfume bottles, and this is what I store my fountain pen inks in. I know, it's a thing when I go travel. Instead of buying t-shirts, I buy and collect these little ink bottles, and I have like 75 of them. So when I bought, and now I have more of those bottles than I have inks. So when I bought these originally, I was like, oh good, I can actually, now I have an excuse to collect more vintage bottles. But these already come in perfect little bottles. Now, I have to say, I'm a little skeptical of the like light fast, because I know even with the finest pigments made for regular watercolors, that even like certain colors like Opera Rose, for example, no matter what manufacturer or brand is making it, they're not light fast. So I don't know, I remain slightly dubious, but I want to try painting with them. I'm gonna compare them to regular watercolors, pan ones that I've made. I also hoard Daniel Smith watercolors, so I thought I would see how they stacked up. Now, Daniel Smith watercolors come in tubes. Here is one, here's a tube. I cut the end off because this one had dried out, and I squeezed them into pans and I let them dry, and then this is how I prefer to work. It's just a lot less waste, but you can work with them from a tube. And then again, I have my fountain pen inks. And then I have my new watercolor. I've never used liquid watercolors, which is bananas, because I've been using watercolors and teaching watercolors for a really long time. But again, I wanted to do them justice. So I'm going to grab a little palette and just do some nice brush strokes before I go ahead and I swatch them out. Also, to be clear, I am very excited about this right now. I'm very excited. Okay, so let's see. I just grabbed just a couple shades of similar colors. This is a fountain pen ink by Waterman, and it's called Harmonious. It's sort of a teal color. So I'm just going to try to, as best as I can, kind of describe to you how it feels. So with fountain pen inks, I am so ruthless. I just take my brush and I just smear it on in. This is cold pressed watercolor paper. And I paint very, I guess you could say, literally when it comes to painting with watercolor. I don't tend to dilute them. I don't mix them with any colors. I just kind of straight up paint with them. And so they stain rather nicely, but everything I do is I tend to have like a bolder, stronger hand. So that's with the fountain pen ink, and I'll add a little water so we can kind of see how they mix when you do dilute them. And then let's see. Oh, I'm so excited. All right, I'm gonna make myself wait. And I'm gonna start next with my Daniel Smith water color. So let's get a similar color. Let's see, probably like phthalo green, which is this puppy right here. I have glass beads in my water to make it help wash my brush off, which is really important when you're working with these inks. They tend to super duper get in the fibers of your brush and stain them. So this is my Daniel Smith. And it's a lot juicier, I should say, than the fountain pen inks, right? Because watercolors are meant to work with water. Fountain pens are not. So this is more of a staining look, and this is a little bit smoother. Again, I'm working on cold press 100% cotton paper by Stonehenge, which I actually hate this paper. So that's why I'm using it for swatching. You can always use your materials. All right, I don't know if I need to even like stir this perhaps. This is Viridian Green. I'm gonna squeeze it a little bit into my palette. Now, looking at it in the palette, it looks almost like opaque. That's interesting. Whereas, you know, the watercolor from the pan of the Daniel Smith would look like this, where it's a lot, you know, it's water, so it's thinner. This looks rather thick. Interesting. And the fountain pen looks like the watercolor. It's like super, super thin. So I'm going to take a damp brush. I'm wiping it off pretty well on my paper towel next to me that you can't see off camera. But this is actually right away. It's actually quite thick. Fascinating. Whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. That is like massively opaque straight up. That's not with adding any water to it. Wow. That's not what I expected. I expected it to look and feel like my Daniel Smith pan, but it's actually way more concentrated. I wonder then, should I be adding water to this to water it down? Almost like as I make my custom palettes in the pans so that we get it thinner. Well, that's easy enough to do for sure. That really changes things. That looks much more like a spring green when you do that. Fascinating. It's really, really different. It's very different. Huh. I'm just looking to see if after shaking it, that kind of stain, you know, I could see the pigment. It looks like I have shaken it so where that's disappeared. Now I'm just gonna add straight up water and see how adding just water to this is gonna dilute each of these, because that helps me understand what I can do with it. So actually I'm kind of letting these dry. I'm gonna dry these with a hair dryer and see how much they're staining. Now, this depends on the color as well. So this isn't like a end all be all test, because some colors, especially like a lot of the deeper blues and probably greens, I'll just stain more than others. So this isn't really, I know this is a lot of it's like color dependent. So this isn't like a fast and true test, but I'm just curious what happens to each one. Especially this is so, I don't know if you can see this, but it's like this thick It almost reminds me of like a gouache and how thick and opaque it is. Fascinating. And also something I didn't expect. All right, so I'm gonna dry this with my hair dryer and then just see what happens by adding a little bit of water. Experimentation time, folks. All right, I gotta hand it to this company too. These are only about $6 for each bottle. That's actually incredibly cheap, just because I'm such an avid user of inks and watercolors. They last a really, really long time. So this is only $6 and I'm sure it lasts as long as a tube of Daniel Smith, which is about double that price. Now, I don't know for sure because they're used differently. Maybe you use this up quicker. I'm not sure, but just saying, I know it feels expensive to buy a whole set of 12 for like 70 bucks, but not when you break it down like that. And most fountain pen ink colors, to give you another comparison, these are about 15 bucks as well. So they're like a third of the price. So that's fantastic. So I just wrote here while I was drawing this, we have ink, we have the regular Daniel Smith pan watercolors, and then we have the Dr. Martens. And I just want to add some water to each of these and just see, you know, what the heck happens. I know what happens already with the inks and the Daniel Smith, but I just want you to see them if you're new. So if we just go a little, zoom in a little bit. So the inks, you can get water soluble inks. There are certain colors and brands of fountain pen ink that are water soluble and that are light fast and have all the things. You have to read your labels really carefully, but the vast majority of them are like this color right here where they're water soluble. They're not light fast, so they will fade over time. That's like most typical. All right, so as you can see, it will disturb the layers. So if you're working among layers, you have to be really careful what you're putting under and on top when you're working with mixed media, because you can super easily reactivate your under layers. All right, so this strip here is the Daniel Smith. And remember I was saying before I started that a lot of watercolors are pretty staining, and I know a lot of the phthalos are as well. So as you can see, this one is not moving as much as the fountain pen ink, but it is watercolor, so it will react when you keep adding water, even though some will stain darker than others. So same water solubility, inks are a little bit more. So again, with mixed media, you have to be tremendously careful of what you're putting on top. And this is normally why I don't use inks as a background layer in any of my mixed media projects. I always use acrylics because they lock solid. All right, now I want to see, super interested to see this for the, wow. Huh. These are like, it's actually not, doesn't appear to be that water soluble. I wonder if these are more like acrylic inks, and I can do a test for those too. Look at that. This is really not moving. What if I really get in here? I'm gonna really be annoying. There we go. And I wanna see if I can reactivate this. So I can, but it's definitely a way less reactive because I was treating this the same way that I did those two. And look, it barely moved. And this one I had a lot more down because I started with that first like doink and then went from there. So interesting. So these are gonna move a lot less. Fascinating. Very, very fascinating. Almost more like an ink than an acrylic ink rather. And maybe I can pull mine out. I have those as well and we can test those. So this is a lighter already, you know, already diluted. Yeah, these suckers are barely moving. That's really, really interesting. All right, I'm gonna go grab a bottle of my acrylic ink and see how it compares, because I'm thinking now that these Dr. Page Martens are much more like acrylic ink, because I wouldn't be really nervous to use this as a bottom layer. That's not reactivating that much. This lighter color isn't reactivating at all. Very surprising. Did not expect that whatsoever. I'm gonna go grab my acrylic ink. We'll do one last little comparison. All right, I do hoard these as well. This is acrylic ink. And just like these fine art watercolors, if you don't touch them for a while, the pigments kind of settle to the bottom. This is also why I don't use these in my fountain pens, because these pigments sometimes can be too big and they end up clogging them. So acrylic inks are permanent. So, and a lot of times too, I find that that sediment is very resistant. So honestly, going in with like a brush to really kick up those pigments and get them moving is more effective. As you can see, this is not doing much. These should be Loctite, anti-water soluble. Just getting another brush here. And so this is the acrylic ink. Again, similar families. I don't have the identical colors in all the products. Now this feels, putting it on the paper, feels much more like the fountain pen ink. It didn't have that opaque beginning the way that the liquid watercolor does, and it looks more staining out the gate. It goes on and feels most like the fountain pen ink at the top, least like the watercolors, which is sort of thin by design. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna let that dry. It shouldn't move. It should be locked tight. So it's funny because these products are so similar to one another. Oh my goodness, I almost knocked over a whole, that was really bad. I almost knocked over my fountain pen ink container. So if I add these, oh, I don't think this was dry yet. I'm like too impatient. Let me use my hair dryer and properly dry that. All right, let me try that again. I just shot that with my hair dryer for a good few minutes. So here we go. It is not moving. And I'm gonna shoot that's not moving either. That's so crazy, you guys. So crazy and so unexpected. Let me try this. No, yeah, it's a little bit, but not much. All right, so I would say, again, see how the ease at which this reactivates? That's how it should be for watercolors. And this is barely. So I'm like so stumped right now. I'm like, awkward. This is not really behaving to me like a watercolor. It's behaving to me like an acrylic ink. Way more like an acrylic ink, actually, because it goes on much more. It's actually more opaque than the acrylic ink. And if you look on the acrylic ink bottle, it says straight up opaque. It's not though. So let's do a quick opacity test. And then we'll do a recap of features. So acrylic ink is supposed to be opaque. It says it right on the bottle. So that means if I go in straight from the bottle, which I just did, and I put it over here, you should not be able to see the writing underneath. Putting a nice hearty. Okay, so you can clearly see the writing underneath. So I would say no, it's not opaque at all. Okay, so read your bottles, but also test. When in doubt, test it out, always. This does say light fast though, and I do think acrylic inks by large are more light fast than their watercolor counterparts. So now we have the PH Martin liquid, which is this whole video is about. And this, as I mentioned at the beginning, it does say it has extreme light fast and brilliance. Yeah. It says, Hydrus gives to the watercolorist a new freedom to blend and intermix while maintaining the transparency and luminosity of the color. It also says titanium white can be intermixed to achieve an opaque gouache watercolor. I think these are already more like opaque gouache. They're just thinner. So this says, just a recap, light, fast, transparent. I don't think it's that transparent. Permanent pigments. Okay, there we go. Right on the bottle, and I didn't read all of these things right away. So it is meant to be permanent. So that's really tricky, the fact that they're marketed as watercolors, because the biggest defining feature of watercolors is that one, they're not opaque, and this one really is, and two, they're not permanent, and these ones are, which explains why they're not moving. So it's almost like a mislabel. And which is why I'm so surprised at what is happening, because it's like going against all my expectations of how watercolors behave. All right, so as far as opacity goes, okay, so they're not truly opaque, but they are dark and they are gonna be permanent when they're dry, or pretty darn close, right? This one didn't move at all when I added water. It didn't move at all. So I would put these as strongly and firmly into the acrylic ink department and not in the watercolor department, which makes them a very different product, because you can use them as the bottom layer of your mixed media projects, and unless you sit and scrub and scrub and scrub, they're not going to move. If they move, might move a tiny bit or not at all, depending on how thick you put them down and how long you're letting them set and dry for. Pan watercolors, fountain pen inks, much more water soluble. And I will just show you, where is my color? Where did my color go? Here it is. If you go over with the inks, okay, there it is going over. So you can see they're all covering about the same. And then here's my Daniel Smith pans. Okay. And then if we add water, again, we should be able to squish this one, this one a little bit because it's still wet, and this one's not at all. So, wacky review. That's a really surprising results to me. So, final recap, fountain pen ink is not light fast. Most of them remains water soluble, which means it reacts to water most of the time. Watercolors, different levels of staining. Some are really light fast, some are really not, depending on the color. pH and the inks, by the way, are normally not light fast, but they do make varieties that are, so read your labels. The pH Martin liquid says they're all wonderfully light fast and kind of permanent. It's a mash between a watercolor but much more so like an acrylic ink because of its permanence. It's stronger opacity than regular watercolor and fountain pen ink, and it's light fast qualities, and I'm super intrigued. I can't believe I've waited 2 years to test that out. That's insane. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to show it because it's pretty boring. I'm going to add the swatches to my watercolor swatches list, even though I'm not considering these watercolors. I'm putting these in the ink categories for sure, but just to have all my eggs in one little watercolor basket, and because it says it on the label, gosh darn it, says watercolor, I'm gonna swatch them and get ready to make my Loch Ness Monster, because that's what's on my docket for the day. Have a great day. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and check out this playlist to see a comparison between fountain pen ink and watercolors and how to use fountain pen inks to make amazing art. Thanks for watching.